Good morning, nerds. Let's take a visit to the Glenstone Museum. This is Two Partially Buried Sinks by Robert Gober. As a gay man in the New York art scene in the 1980s, Gober was deeply affected by the AIDS epidemic. He got involved with ACT UP, an activist group that protested the government's inaction to stop the AIDS crisis, and he made a series of these sinks. He said, "I was a gay man living in the epicenter of the 20th century America's worst health epidemic, and the sinks were a byproduct of that. What do you do when you stand in front of a sink? You clean yourself." Yet they were about the inability to do that. By burying these sinks, he turns them into gravestones. This is untitled Lover Boys by Felix Gonzalez Torres. After his partner died of AIDS-related illness in 1991, Gonzalez Torres made a series of these candy-based works. When installed, they are an ideal weight of 1 or 2 men. The viewer is invited to take a candy, and the pile depletes over time. The work symbolizes the wasting effect of AIDS. More importantly, it implicates the viewer. The Lover Boys don't waste away on their own. They waste away because we literally consume them. HIV and tuberculosis are deeply intertwined. TB is the most common cause of death for people with HIV. Left untreated, they both cause debilitating weight loss. But most importantly, they continue to cause needless deaths because both HIV and TB primarily affect marginalized people. As John Green said at the United Nations,
23 years ago, Dr. Peter Mugeni, in a room very much like this one, said of HIV medications, where are the drugs? The drugs are where the disease is not. And where is the disease? The disease is where the drugs are not. And that is the situation that we are in today with tuberculosis. The cure is where the disease is not, and the disease is where the cure is not.
The Glenstone Foundation is funded by stock in Danaher Corporation, a biotech conglomerate whose subsidiary Cepheid manufactures an essential molecular testing device called GeneXpert. Within 2 hours, GeneXpert can accurately diagnose tuberculosis and identify which drugs a person should take. Without GeneXpert, some people wait months for a diagnosis. But Danaher charges people in low to middle income countries $15 for extensively drug-resistant TB tests and HIV tests. That's more than a week's wage in many countries. Because of those high prices, only 40% of people diagnosed with TB in 2022 received a rapid test, while the rest received slower, less accurate tests. This is Untitled Closet by Robert Gober, another piece of AIDS art at Glenstone. I can't help but notice a bit of irony in overcharging the poorest people in the world for HIV and TB tests, and then using that profit to buy a piece of art that critiques the biomedical establishment for keeping treatment away from people with HIV. This is Untitled Perfect Lovers by Felix Gonzalez Torres. The 2 clocks are identical. They're synchronized when they're installed, but over time they fall out of sync. The perfect lovers could be interpreted as 2 people living with HIV torn out of sync by death. But you could also see them as Danaher and the end of HIV and TB. Danaher could be fighting hand in hand with public health organizations to end tuberculosis, but instead it overcharges for HIV and TB tests. Danaher, it's time for $5 tests for TB and HIV. Learn from Felix Gonzalez Torres and from Robert Gober, and do your part to make all GeneXpert tests available to everybody who needs them.